Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, today I want to talk about a moment in history that is not just coming, it is here. A nation that forgets its past is doomed to repeat it. And we stand at a crossroads where yesterday's wisdom must guide tomorrow's destiny. The liberty we inherit is not a gift, it is a responsibility, and every generation must prove worthy of the price that was paid for it. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction, and we are that generation called to defend it. Our forgotten founders didn't speak to us as relics of the past. They spoke as architects of the future. To secure the blessings of liberty, we must first secure the courage of our convictions. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and this vigilance begins not in Washington, but in the hearts of every American who refuses to surrender truth for comfort. A republic, if you can keep it, was not a statement of pride. It was a warning, a challenge, a call to action. Today, we the people must decide if we will simply be inhabitants of America or stewards of its promise. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. And it will take courage to stand, to speak, and to act when silence feels safer. At this 2025 crossroads, the words of our founders ring louder than ever. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. The question before us is not whether we know these truths, but whether we will live them. A nation that forgets its past is doomed to repeat it. History is not just a collection of dates and events stored in dusty books. It is the compass that points a people toward their destiny. When we lose sight of where we came from, we wander into dangers already known to those who walked before us. Our ancestors left behind more than monuments and documents. They left warnings, lessons carved from sacrifice, and wisdom purchased at the cost of blood and suffering. Every freedom we now take for granted was once fiercely fought for, and every right we enjoy today was defended against overwhelming odds. If we allowed the memory of those struggles to fade, we risk trading our hard-earned liberty for illusions of safety, comfort, or convenience. The founders of America did not envision a perfect nation. They envisioned a vigilant people. They knew that tyranny is not always born in foreign lands, but can grow quietly at home when a nation grows careless with its own history. They understood that oppression often disguises itself as order, and control can be wrapped in promises of security. This is why they urged us to study the past, not to dwell on it, but to recognize the patterns of human nature that repeat over and over through time. They saw clearly that when citizens forget the price of freedom, they become willing to sell it cheaply. Look at the pages of history, and you will find civilizations that once stood mighty, now only remembered in ruins and fading stories. Rome did not collapse in a single night. It decayed slowly as its people traded civic duty for comfort and truth for entertainment. Nations have risen with courage and vision, only to crumble when that vision dimmed and their people stopped guarding what mattered most. The founders saw these examples and designed a system meant to outlast such decline, but they also knew its survival would depend on whether future generations remembered why it was built in the first place. Forgetting our past is not just about losing the facts. It's about losing the spirit that sustained those who came before us. When we stop telling the stories of their courage, their sacrifices, and their unwavering stand against injustice, we strip away the very fuel that inspires a people to remain free. Our children grow up thinking liberty is automatic, not realizing it is the rarest treasure in human history, and that it must be defended sometimes against forces that come dressed as friends. They forget that oppression often enters softly in the form of laws that seem harmless, leaders who seem charming, or ideas that seem compassionate but slowly erode the foundation of freedom. There are patterns in history that repeat like the turning of the seasons. Tyranny, once defeated, waits patiently for the memory of its horrors to fade. Corruption takes root when accountability is forgotten. Division grows when the shared values that bind a people together are neglected or replaced with shallow distractions. These are not new problems, but old ones wearing new clothes. Without the light of history to reveal them, we mistake them for something harmless, only to discover too late that they are the same chains our ancestors broke free from generations ago. Every great movement for liberty was fueled by people who knew their history. The American Revolution did not arise from ignorance. It arose from study. The colonists knew the history of ancient republics, of European monarchies, of the rights of Englishmen, and of the abuses that flourished when power went unchecked. They knew what happens when a government drifts beyond the control of the people, and they refused to allow it. Their resistance was not a reckless gamble, but an informed stand based on lessons learned from centuries of struggle. When we erase, distort, or ignore our history, we remove the guardrails that keep us from making the same mistakes. It is not just about remembering dates. It is about understanding cause and effect, action and consequence. It is about recognizing the warning signs before they turn into crises. It is about realizing that no matter how advanced our technology or how modern our society, human nature remains the same, and so do the dangers to freedom. The founders warned us, history teaches us, and the future depends on whether we listen. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It is not a permanent possession, not an inheritance that is automatically passed down from parents to children like a piece of land or a family heirloom. It must be earned anew by every generation, guarded with vigilance and defended with resolve. The moment we believe freedom is self-sustaining is the moment we begin to lose it. For liberty lives only as long as the people are willing to protect it. Those who came before us paid the price. Through battles fought, sacrifices made, and courage shown in the face of overwhelming odds. But their victory was not the end of the struggle. It was the handing over of a torch, a sacred trust placed in the hands of those who would come after. Every generation inherits not only the benefits of freedom, but also the duty to preserve it. The founders understood that human nature has not changed across the centuries, that the same forces that sought to oppress in the past would rise again in the future. They knew that the tendency of power is to grow and of liberty to shrink unless checked by a people determined to hold the line. This is why they wrote constitutions and charters, why they put limits on governments and protections for individuals. They were not writing for themselves alone. They were writing for those yet unborn, for people who would never know their names yet, would live or die by the strength of their convictions. The extinction of freedom does not always come through invasion or violent overthrow. More often, it fades through neglect. Rights that are not exercised become rights that are easily taken away. Responsibilities that are abandoned leave a vacuum, and into that vacuum steps control. The erosion is gradual, barely noticeable at first, until one day a people wake to find that the freedoms they assumed were permanent have been reduced to privileges granted and revoked at will. This is why the vigilance of each generation is not optional. It is the lifeblood of liberty itself. The price that must be paid for freedom is not always in blood. It is often in the daily discipline of citizenship. It is in holding leaders accountable, in participating in the decisions that shape a nation, in teaching children the value of what they've been given. It is in speaking truth, even when it is unpopular, in standing firm even when it is costly. These are the quiet battles fought in classrooms, in town halls, in conversations at the dinner table, in the quiet determination to pass on a nation that is still free. Those who do not understand this truth fall into the dangerous belief that liberty is a constant, that once gained, it will remain forever without effort. History offers no support for such a belief. Every free society that failed to renew its commitment to liberty has eventually lost it, whether through the rise of tyranny, the apathy of its people, or the slow drift into dependency. Nations do not lose freedom in one dramatic moment. They lose it piece by piece, concession by concession, until the chains are so light they are barely felt, and so strong they cannot be broken. Our founders did not simply speak of freedom in grand speeches. They lived it through sacrifice. They knew their actions were not just for their time, but for the generations yet to come. They understood that the freedoms they fought for could vanish within a single lifetime if those who inherited them failed to defend them. This is why they urged vigilance, courage, and an unshakable commitment to principle. The truth is, each generation is the first generation when it comes to liberty. The battles may change, the threats may take new forms, but the duty is the same. Freedom is fragile precisely because it depends on the will of the people to remain free. When that will is strong, liberty thrives. When it weakens, liberty fades. This is why the founders' words remain as urgent now as they were then. Because the distance between freedom and its extinction is never more than the space of one generation. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. Liberty is not something that can be won once and then left unattended like a monument standing untouched through the years. It is a living trust, fragile and easily damaged, requiring constant care and protection. The moment a free people grow complacent, believing their rights are secure without their active participation, is the moment those rights begin to erode. Freedom has enemies, sometimes visible and obvious, sometimes hidden and subtle, and those enemies never rest. They wait for distraction, for division, for the slow drift of a nation's attention away from the principles that sustain it. Eternal vigilance is not paranoia. It is the sober understanding that liberty is always one careless moment away from being lost. History is full of examples where societies believed themselves too advanced, too enlightened, or too stable to lose their freedom, only to watch it slip away piece by piece. The founders of America understood that the greatest threat to liberty often comes not from foreign invaders, but from within, through the slow concentration of power, through leaders who promise safety at the cost of autonomy, through the quiet acceptance of government overreach in the name of progress or order. They recognized that the desire for control is a constant in human nature, and that without watchful citizens, that desire can grow unchecked. Vigilance is the barrier that prevents power from crossing the boundaries meant to contain it. Eternal vigilance begins in the mind. It is the willingness to question, to think critically, and to examine the actions of leaders without blind loyalty. It means refusing to accept the erosion of liberty as normal, no matter how small the changes may seem. Every law, every policy, every decision that affects personal freedom must be weighed against the principles that protect it. A free people must be informed people, for ignorance is the enemy of vigilance. If the citizens do not understand their rights, they will not recognize when those rights are being diminished. Vigilance also lives in action. It is more than watching. It is acting when something threatens the foundation of liberty. It is voting with knowledge, engaging in civic debate, and demanding transparency from those in power. It is standing against corruption, even when it is disguised as progress. It is resisting the temptation to hand over responsibility in exchange for convenience. For every power we yield to government is a power that may not be returned. Eternal vigilance means that freedom is defended not just on battlefields, but in the quiet decisions of everyday life. The founders themselves were vigilant students of history. They had seen the fate of republics before them, how liberty could be lost to apathy, to factionalism, to the slow creep of centralized control. They knew that no constitution, no matter how well written, could survive if the people ceased to guard it. That is why they warned not just against foreign enemies, but against the decay that comes from within when citizens neglect their duties. Vigilance was their insurance against this decay, and they expected it to be the duty of every generation that followed. Complacency is the enemy of vigilance. It whispers that everything will remain the same, that the safeguards in place will hold without effort, that someone else will take care of the hard work of defending freedom. But freedom does not survive on autopilot. It survives through deliberate, unrelenting attention. The very moment a people believe they no longer need to watch is the moment they become vulnerable to those who would exploit that trust. Eternal vigilance is the habit of never assuming that liberty is safe simply because it has existed for a long time. It is also a recognition that the threats to freedom evolve. The dangers faced by one generation are not identical to those faced by another, but the principle remains. Liberty is always under pressure from those who would prefer control. In one era, the threat may come in the form of kings and empires. In another, it may come in the form of bureaucracies and laws disguised as protection. Vigilance means being able to recognize these threats no matter their disguise, and to respond before they take root. The price of freedom is not paid once. It is paid continually through awareness, courage, and the willingness to stand guard over what is most precious. It is the unending duty of a people who understand that liberty is not a gift handed down from government, but a right that must be defended by the governed themselves. Those who understand this truth keep watch, knowing that every moment of inattention is an opening for liberty's enemies. The founders knew it, history confirms it, and the responsibility remains as urgent now as it ever was. A republic, if you can keep it. These words, spoken by Benjamin Franklin, were not a casual remark, but a challenge wrapped in a warning. A republic is not a self-sustaining machine. It is a living system that requires the active participation of its citizens. It is held together not just by laws and institutions, but by the virtue, wisdom, and vigilance of the people. The founders knew that creating a republic was difficult, but keeping it would be far more demanding. They understood that every generation would face its own tests, its own temptations to trade liberty for comfort, principle for convenience, and self-governance for dependency. A republic is fragile precisely because it depends on the consent of the governed. And that consent is meaningful only when the governed are informed, engaged, and committed to the preservation of their freedoms. In a monarchy, the will of the people is irrelevant. In a dictatorship, it is suppressed. But in a republic, the people themselves are the final safeguard against tyranny. And that safeguard fails the moment they become indifferent. The founders feared that the greatest threat to the republic would not come from foreign invasion, but from within, as generations grew comfortable, complacent, and willing to surrender their role in exchange for promises of stability. Keeping a republic means protecting the delicate balance between liberty and order. Too little order, and chaos threatens the fabric of society. Too much order, and liberty is strangled by control. The founders constructed a system of checks and balances to prevent power from concentrating in any one branch of government. But they knew those structures would only work if the people demanded they be upheld. Without an active citizenry to enforce those limits, the system would bend and eventually break under the weight of unchecked ambition. The phrase, "if you can keep it," carries the recognition that republics throughout history have often failed. Ancient Rome began as a republic built on civic duty and shared responsibility, yet it fell into empire when its citizens abandoned their commitment to self-governance. The temptation to let others decide, to let the machinery of government run without oversight, has always been strong. The founders were well aware that human nature gravitates toward ease, and that the work of maintaining freedom is often harder than the work of winning it in the first place. To keep a republic requires more than voting every few years. It demands a culture that values truth over propaganda, responsibility over entitlement, and unity over division. It requires citizens who understand the principles on which the nation was founded and who are willing to stand for those principles even when it is unpopular. Education plays a crucial role in this. Without a people educated in the principles of liberty, the republic loses its foundation. The founders believed in the necessity of an informed populace because they knew that ignorance is fertile soil for tyranny. The erosion of a republic is rarely sudden. It happens slowly as the people stop paying attention to the small breaches in their freedoms, as they tolerate corruption for the sake of political loyalty, as they allow the meaning of their founding principles to be redefined. Each compromise may seem minor in isolation, but together they accumulate into a transformation that leaves the republic unrecognizable. The challenge Franklin posed is not just about recognizing danger when it is obvious, but about seeing it when it is subtle. Keeping a republic also means holding leaders accountable, regardless of their political alignment. Loyalty to the principles of the Constitution must be greater than loyalty to any party or personality. When citizens place individuals above institutions, they invite the kind of power worship that corrodes self-government. The founders understood that men are not angels and that no leader, no matter how virtuous, should be trusted without oversight. A true republic survives when the people value the rule of law over the rule of men. There is also a moral dimension to keeping a republic. Self-governance depends on self-discipline. A free people must have the strength to govern themselves before they can govern a nation. Without a shared moral compass, the republic's unity dissolves and its laws lose their authority. The founders believed that liberty without virtue would eventually destroy itself, because a society unwilling to restrain its own appetites will eventually demand that the government do it for them, at the cost of their freedom. When Franklin said, "if you can keep it," he was passing the weight of responsibility to future generations. It was a reminder that the founding was not the finish line, but the starting point of an unending race. The republic would survive only if its citizens understood its value, defended its principles, and resisted the forces, both internal and external, that would pull it apart. The keeping of a republic is not a task for some distant guardian. It is the daily work of the people themselves, who must decide whether they will rise to the challenge or let it slip away through neglect. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. This truth is as relevant today as it was when first spoken, for it captures the essence of the balance of power in a free society. In a tyranny, the people live in constant fear. Fear of punishment for speaking their minds, fear of retribution for questioning authority, fear of losing their livelihoods or their lives if they stand against those in power. Such fear is the tool by which oppressive governments maintain control. For a fearful population is an obedient population. When citizens live under the shadow of government intimidation, they no longer act as free individuals, but as subjects, waiting for permission to exist within boundaries drawn by others. A government that fears the people, however, is one that understands its role as servant, not master. This does not mean a government should fear mob rule or chaos. It means the leaders know they are accountable to the governed, that their power is conditional, and that their authority rests entirely on the consent of the people. Such a government respects its limits because it knows that violating them risks awakening the very force that grants its legitimacy. This dynamic is the heartbeat of a free republic, where the ultimate authority lies not in the halls of power, but in the will of the citizenry. Fear between government and people is not symmetrical. When people fear the government, the balance is broken and power consolidates in dangerous ways. History shows this pattern clearly. Regimes that silence dissent, criminalize opposition, and punish political disagreement inevitably slide into totalitarianism. It may begin subtly, with small restrictions, with promises of safety, with the justification that freedoms must be curtailed for the greater good. But over time, the list of things people are not allowed to say, do, or believe grows longer, and the courage to resist grows smaller. In such an environment, tyranny becomes not just possible, but inevitable. The founders of America sought to reverse that dynamic. They envisioned a system in which the people held the ultimate check on government through their ability to replace it, challenge it, and restrain it. This is why they enshrined the freedoms of speech, press, and assembly, and why they placed limits on governmental powers through the Constitution. They understood that liberty is not sustained by the goodwill of leaders, but by the vigilance of the governed. A government that knows the people will stand against overreach is a government that must tread carefully. When government fears the people, it acts with humility, knowing that its authority can be taken away. It avoids abusing power because it understands that abuse will be met with resistance. It operates transparently, knowing that secrecy breeds suspicion and suspicion breeds unrest. It governs within its lawful bounds, aware that the people will defend those bounds. This fear is not the fear of violence, but the fear of accountability. The awareness that leaders, serve at the pleasure of the people, and that betrayal of trust has consequences. The absence of this healthy fear leads to corruption. When leaders believe they are untouchable, when they are convinced that the people are too apathetic or too intimidated to challenge them, they begin to act as rulers rather than representatives. They pass laws to entrench their own power, shield themselves from scrutiny, and suppress opposition. Over time, the relationship between government and citizen shifts from one of mutual respect to one of dominance and submission. Maintaining liberty requires a constant reassertion of the people's authority. It requires that citizens not only know their rights, but exercise them regularly. It requires speaking out against abuses, even when it is uncomfortable, questioning policies, even when it is unpopular, and participating in the processes that determine the course of the nation. The founders knew that the tools for liberty were only as strong as the willingness of the people to use them. Fear in the right direction safeguards freedom. When the people fear the government, it is a sign that the power has tilted dangerously toward tyranny. When the government fears the people, it is a sign that the balance has been preserved, that those in power remember who gave them that power and why it was given conditionally. This balance is not maintained automatically. It must be guarded in every generation. For once fear flows in the wrong direction, reclaiming liberty becomes far more difficult. The strength of a free society lies in its people's confidence to hold their leaders to account without fear of reprisal. It lies in the understanding that the government exists to serve, not to rule. It lies in the shared recognition that the people are not subjects to be managed, but citizens to be respected. This is the foundation upon which liberty stands, and without it, the shift toward tyranny is only a matter of time. To secure the blessings of liberty, we must first secure the courage of our convictions. Freedom is not maintained by words alone. It is sustained by the willingness to stand for what is right, even when it is difficult, costly, or unpopular. The blessings of liberty, peace, prosperity, opportunity, and the ability to live according to one's own conscience are the fruits of a tree that must be nourished by courage. Without courage, principles become empty ideals, and rights become fragile promises that can be taken away the moment they are challenged. The founders understood this truth and demonstrated it with their lives, for they risked everything: wealth, reputation, safety, and even life itself, to secure a future they might never personally enjoy. The courage of conviction is more than the absence of fear. It is the decision to act in spite of fear. It is the steadfast commitment to truth when falsehood is easier, to justice when compromise is tempting, to principle when convenience beckons. Liberty requires such courage because it is always under pressure from those who seek control. These pressures rarely come in the form of sudden attacks. They come as slow encroachments, subtle shifts, and the normalization of ideas that erode individual rights. Without courage, these intrusions go unchallenged, and freedom quietly slips away. The blessings of liberty are not merely abstract ideals. They are tangible realities that shape the daily lives of a free people. They mean being able to speak without fear of punishment, to worship without interference, to work and create without oppressive restrictions, to raise children according to one's values, and to determine one's own path in life. These blessings are precious precisely because they are rare in human history, and they remain rare because they demand more than passive enjoyment. They demand active defense. The defense of liberty is not always on a battlefield. More often it is in the choices individuals make to uphold truth, resist injustice, and remain faithful to the principles on which their freedom rests. Courage in defense of liberty is needed in both great and small ways. It is needed when standing against oppressive laws, when challenging corruption, and when speaking truth to power. It is also needed in the everyday acts of refusing to conform to falsehoods, of protecting the vulnerable, and of teaching the next generation the value of the freedoms they inherit. Without the courage to act, freedom can be eroded not by a single sweeping blow, but by 1,000 small cuts that go unnoticed until it is too late. The founders did not speak of liberty in vague or sentimental terms. They defined it, protected it in law, and were prepared to defend it with their lives. Their courage of conviction was not theoretical. It was tested in the crucible of revolution, in the face of overwhelming odds, against the might of an empire. They understood that courage is not something that can be delegated to others. It is the responsibility of every individual who values freedom. That same truth applies to every generation. Liberty survives only where there are people willing to risk personal cost to protect it. Conviction without courage is powerless. It is easy to say we believe in freedom when it is unthreatened. But the real measure comes when belief is tested, when standing for it might bring ridicule, loss, or danger. Courage gives conviction its strength, turning belief into action and words into deeds. In times of peace, this courage may be quiet and steady. In times of crisis, it may be bold and defiant. In either case, it is indispensable, for the blessings of liberty will not defend themselves. Securing the courage of our convictions also means preparing for the cost that comes with it. Those who stand for liberty will often face opposition from those who see freedom as an obstacle to their own ambitions. They may be called stubborn, disruptive, or dangerous simply because they refuse to bow to what is wrong. Yet it is precisely this refusal that preserves freedom for all, even for those who oppose it. The founders faced such accusations, yet they pressed on, knowing that history would judge not by the comfort they maintained, but by the principles they upheld. The blessings of liberty are not static. They can grow or they can fade, depending on whether the people have the courage to protect them. In moments of national testing, when fear tempts a society to trade freedom for the illusion of security, it is the courage of conviction that holds the line. In the quieter moments, when no crisis looms, It is the same courage that keeps freedom alive through vigilance, education, and the steady resistance to anything that undermines it. The price of liberty is not paid only in times of war. It is paid in every generation by those willing to live with integrity, speak with honesty, and act with principle no matter the cost.